Hey everyone, ready to finally ditch all that diet drama and figure out what healthy eating really means?
I'm ready. Are you?
I am. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into those Australian dietary guidelines,
Sounds good.
using that Better Health channel page as our guide. Yeah, most people just want to know the basics, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Without getting bogged down in all those complicated rules and restrictions. And guess what?
What?
These guidelines were updated in August 2024. So they're totally up to date.
Awesome.
And they're all about making healthy eating sustainable. Something that actually fits into your life.
That's great because one of the things I find interesting about them is that they've moved away from that whole good food, bad food thing.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Which I think is a really good thing because it can make healthy eating feel, well, super restrictive.
Totally. It's like you're constantly feeling guilty.
Right. But these guidelines are more about the big picture.
Okay, so no more beating ourselves up over a single cookie. I could definitely get on board with that.
Exactly. It's about your overall eating patterns. It's about finding balance,
Yeah, I hear you. But where do we even start with this big picture thing? It still feels kind of abstract to me.
That's where the 5 food groups come in. Think of them like the foundation for a balanced diet. So you've got your vegetables and legumes,
Right.
fruits,
Got it.
lean meats and alternatives, your grains, and then your dairy or alternative.
Okay, so the usual suspects. But sometimes those recommended amounts, it can all feel a bit much.
I know what you mean.
Like, how much of each group do we really need? It's like doing math at every single meal.
Well, how about we just focus on one group to make it a little bit easier to grasp?
Okay, sounds good.
Did you know that eating more veggies can actually have a positive impact on your gut health?
Seriously, I had no idea.
Yeah. Eating a wide variety of vegetables and legumes is actually really great for your gut microbiome.
Okay, I've heard of that. But remind me, what is the microbiome again?
So your gut microbiome is basically this community of trillions of microorganisms living in your digestive tract.
Wow. Trillions.
And having a thriving and diverse microbiome is linked to all sorts of benefits.
Like what?
Like better digestion, improved immunity, even mental health.
Wow. I never really connected veggies to gut health before. So it's not just about getting our 5 servings a day.
Right.
It's about making sure we're eating lots of different types of vegetables, too.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complicated.
Okay, good.
Instead of having the same salad day after day, how about trying something different? Like roasting some root vegetables with herbs?
That sounds good.
Or trying a new lentil soup recipe? Or even just throwing a handful of spinach into your morning smoothie?
Okay, those are all pretty easy swaps. I can do that. But what are those sometimes foods?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The ones that we all love but know they shouldn't be everyday staples?
Yeah.
Where do those fit into this balanced picture?
The guidelines actually call them discretionary choices.
Discretionary choices.
Things like cakes, processed meats, all those sugary drinks. The treats that aren't that nutritious.
Right. The fun stuff. I feel like those are always the first things to go when people try to eat healthier.
Yeah.
Which can make it all feel super restrictive,
And that's where that all or nothing thinking can really sabotage you. The guidelines acknowledge that it's totally fine to enjoy these foods sometimes.
Okay.
It's all about moderation.
So it's more about being mindful than totally cutting things out. Because let's be honest, life happens.
It does.
We get busy, we get tired, and then those healthy habits kind of fly out the window.
I know.
Do these guidelines offer any practical tips for dealing with those real-life situations?
Oh, yeah, for sure. They suggest focusing on meal planning.
Okay.
And even making shopping lists, so you can stay on track.
See, I knew there was a reason those grocery lists always ended up lost in the bottom of my bag.
It helps you plan ahead. So that way you're less likely to just grab those unhealthy options when you're pressed for time.
Right. You're already prepared. So planning is key. But what about when those cravings hit? Any advice for those moments?
Well, they emphasize having quick and healthy options ready to go.
Go like what?
Stock your pantry with things like soups, pasta, rice, beans, lentils,
Right.
ingredients that you can easily whip up into something satisfying.
So it's about being prepared, like a healthy eating scout.
Exactly. Make sure you have the right tools to combat those hunger pangs.
Okay. Now, what about those nights when you're just too tired to even think about cooking?
Takeout nights.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it.
I feel like takeout can be a real challenge for healthy eating.
I agree, and they actually address that in the guidelines. They suggest cooking in bulk.
Oh, like meal prepping.
Yeah, and freezing leftovers. It's a total lifesaver.
Right.
Or if you do get takeout, be mindful of the portions and choose dishes that have those key food groups we talked about.
Okay, so we've got strategies for meal planning, stocking up, even navigating takeout menus. I'm already feeling more equipped.
Yeah.
But what about the budget? Healthy food always seems so expensive.
It's a common misconception, and the guidelines actually offer some fantastic tips for keeping it affordable. One really simple one is to cook extra
Okay.
and use those leftovers. It saves you time and money.
Less waste, more meals. I like it. Any other money-saving tricks you can share?
How about hitting up your local markets right before they close?
Really?
Yeah, a lot of times they'll offer discounts because they want to clear out their stock. You can score some great deals.
That's a great tip. I've never signed up before. Anything else?
Buying in bulk and freezing portions is also a great way to save, especially for things like grains and legumes.
Makes sense. Those are some great strategies. I'm feeling a lot less intimidated now. But let's talk about the villains of the diet world.
Who are we talking about?
Salt and sugar. How do those fit into this balanced approach?
It's funny, they always dominate the conversation about healthy eating. When it comes to salt, the guidelines say to consume less than 5 grams a day.
Wow, okay.
And before you think, oh, I barely even use the salt shaker, remember that most of the salt we eat actually comes from packaged and processed foods.
Ah, sneaky salt.
So cutting back on those processed snacks and takeout meals, it's a win-win.
Huh.
Less salt and more room for those nutrient-rich foods from our 5 key groups.
Makes sense. So what about sugar?
Well, it's not about demonizing it entirely.
Okay.
It's more about being mindful of where it's coming from and how much we're actually eating. And you know what the biggest culprit is?
What?
Sugary drinks.
Yeah, that makes sense. So water is still the best.
Absolutely. It's the healthiest choice.
Yeah.
The guidelines are pretty clear about limiting sugary drinks, especially for kids.
Right, because kids are more susceptible to all those negative health impacts from too much sugar.
Exactly.
So salt and sugar, moderation, and awareness are key. But what about fat? I feel like the advice on fat changes all the time. What's the latest?
You're right. The science is always evolving. What's important now is understanding that there are different types of fats. Healthy unsaturated fats and unhealthy saturated fats.
Got it.
Those unsaturated fats, the ones in olive oil, avocados, nuts, those are good for you. They can help lower cholesterol and help your body absorb vitamins.
So I can keep putting olive oil on my toast.
Absolutely. Small amounts of these healthy fats are essential. Then there are those saturated fats.
Which are the bad guys?
They're found in things like butter, cream, and fatty meats. And those are the ones you want to limit.
Got it. Choosing the right fats, not eliminating them completely. So what's next on our healthy eating to-do list?
Let's talk serving sizes. They can be really confusing.
Tell me about it. Trying to figure out how much of each food group to eat. It's like a secret code sometimes.
But the good news is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating is super clear about it.
Really?
It lays it all out for you.
I've definitely spent a lot of time in the grocery store, staring at those charts, trying to do math in my head.
We've all been there.
Can we get an actual example, just to make this whole thing a bit less abstract?
Sure, let's take fruit. A standard serving of fruit would be like 1 medium piece of fruit,
Okay.
like an apple, banana, or orange.
Okay, easy enough.
Or 2 smaller pieces, like apricots or kiwi fruit.
Perfect, totally get it now. So we've covered a lot here, those 5 food groups, the sometimes foods, practical tips, even busted that myth about healthy eating being expensive. What else is important to know?
Well, one thing that I think sometimes gets overlooked is variety.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about eating the same 5 things day in and day out.
Right.
It's about mixing things up, exploring all those different fruits, vegetables, grains, protein sources.
Okay.
It keeps your meals interesting and makes sure you're getting a wider range of nutrients.
It's like building a diverse portfolio, but for our health.
Exactly.
I'm into it. So all this, it seems pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
but how does it all actually connect to our overall health? Like, why is following these guidelines so important?
It's a great question, and the answer is pretty huge. Following these guidelines can actually reduce your risk of developing all kinds of chronic diseases.
Like what?
Heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, even some cancers.
So it's not just about looking good in our genes.
Oh,
It's about our long-term health and well-being.
exactly. And these guidelines aren't just for adults either.
Oh, that's right.
They're for all ages, even babies.
So it's never too early to start building those healthy habits.
They're too late either.
Speaking of recommendations, I noticed in that Better Health Channel article, they talk about alcohol too.
Yeah, it's in there.
What do they have to say about that?
Well, they recommend that healthy men and women limit their alcohol intake to no more than 10 standard drinks a week
Okay.
and no more than 4 standard drinks in a single day.
Which, of course, means kids, pregnant women, and those who are breastfeeding shouldn't be drinking at all.
Obviously.
Okay.
It's all about making those informed choices that put your health first.
This has been so incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand those basic building blocks of healthy eating. It's actually less overwhelming than I thought.
That's great. Remember, it's a journey, not a sprint. Even small changes over time can make a big difference.
Totally agree. So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We debunked those good versus bad foods.
Yeah, I did.
We looked at those key food groups, even tackled some of those real-life challenges.
Yeah.
Things like meal planning, staying on budget.
All the important stuff.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else in these guidelines that you think really stands out? Maybe something that people often miss?
One thing that comes to mind is mindful eating.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. What is that?
It's about how you eat, not just what you eat. Paying attention to your body, really savoring your food,
Oh.
tuning into your hunger and fullness cues, it can have a huge impact on your relationship with food.
Mindful eating.
Yeah.
That definitely sounds like something we need to explore more.
We should.
But I think for now, we should let all this information sink in. We've covered so much already.
Agreed.
And to our listeners, stay tuned for the next part of this deep dive. We'll be getting into some really fascinating concepts,
Definitely.
including that mindful eating we just talked about. And we'll look at how all of this can help you create a healthy and sustainable relationship with food.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
Picking up where we left off, I'm really glad we're talking about this mindful eating thing.
Me too.
I think it's something we could all benefit from.
Right. Especially in our crazy busy world. It's funny, we always talk about healthy eating in terms of what to eat,
Right.
but we rarely talk about how to eat, like the actual experience of eating.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that's such a missing piece.
Yeah.
But mindful eating is all about tuning into your senses,
Okay.
really savoring each bite, paying attention to your body's signals. Like, are you actually hungry or are you full?
So it's the opposite of like mindlessly scarfing down dinner while scrolling on your phone.
Pretty much. Guilty as charged.
Is that what I'm doing wrong? Just kidding.
Yeah.
But seriously, it's hard to slow down.
I know it is. Life is so fast-paced these days.
It feels like we're constantly racing against the clock.
But even making small changes can have a big impact. Like, imagine actually sitting down at the table
Okay.
without distractions, taking a moment to appreciate your food, like really look at it, smell it, maybe take a few deep breaths before you take that first bite.
Okay.
Like,
I think I can handle that.
yeah,
I mean, it sounds so simple,
right.
but just thinking about it is already making me feel more relaxed.
It's pretty powerful.
Yep.
And here's what's really interesting. Mindful eating can actually help you enjoy your food more.
How so?
Well, when you're fully present, you actually notice all the subtle flavors and textures that you might normally miss.
That makes sense. It's kind of like when you really listen to a piece of music. You pick up on all those little details that you never noticed before. But let's be real for a sec.
Okay.
Sometimes you just hit that 3 p.m. slump and all you can think about is chocolate.
Yeah.
How does mindful eating help in those moments? When you're dealing with those intense cravings.
It's not about magically eliminating cravings. It's more about becoming aware of them. Like, instead of just grabbing that chocolate bar automatically,
Yeah.
take a pause, ask yourself, am I really hungry or is this just a craving because of something else going on?
Oh, okay. So it's about recognizing those emotional triggers we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
And then finding healthier ways to cope.
Exactly. Maybe you need to go for a walk, call a friend, or even just take a few minutes to do some deep breathing. It's about figuring out what works for you.
And having those tools ready when those cravings hit.
Right.
This is making me realize that healthy eating is about so much more than just the food on our plate.
It is.
It's about our mindset, our habits, our whole relationship with food.
Absolutely. It's a holistic thing. It's not just what you eat.
Right.
It's how you eat, why you eat, and how you feel about food.
Wow. This is a lot to think about. I feel like we've gone way beyond those basic dietary guidelines.
We have, and that's what's so cool about these deep dives. We get to explore all these different layers and see how everything is connected.
Right.
Healthy eating is a complex and fascinating thing.
So speaking of journeys, where do we go from here? How do we actually put all of this into practice?
Just start small. Pick one or two things that really resonate with you
Okay.
and focus on those. Like maybe you try having one mindful meal a day
Okay.
or try a new vegetable every week, little steps.
So it's more about progress over perfection.
Exactly. You don't have to overhaul your whole life overnight.
Thank goodness. It's a relief to hear that.
And remember, what works for one person might not work for someone else.
Right. We're all different.
You got to find what feels good for you.
That's good advice.
Hmm.
I feel a lot less pressure already.
Yeah.
But what about people who struggle with emotional eating? Like, how can they break those patterns?
Self-awareness is key. Start paying attention to the situations or emotions that trigger you.
So, like, notice if you're reaching for comfort food when you're stressed, bored, lonely.
Yeah, all those things. Even when you're happy.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of happy hour snacking.
Yeah.
It's like food has to be part of every celebration.
And it's fine if it's just every once in a while, but if it starts becoming a problem, if it's impacting your health or how you feel,
Then it's time to take a step back.
yeah. So once you figure out your triggers, then you can start brainstorming some healthier ways to cope.
Okay.
If stress is a big trigger for you, maybe you try yoga or meditation. If it's boredom, maybe you pick up a new hobby or call a friend.
So it's all about finding other ways to deal with those emotions.
Exactly. Instead of just always turning to food,
Right.
it's about addressing the root cause, not just covering it up with food.
Wow. I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah.
But it makes so much sense.
It's really about taking care of yourself.
Yeah. I'm starting to see that there's this whole mental and emotional side to healthy eating.
There is.
It's like this hidden layer that I never even knew existed.
It's so important. We can know all about those food groups and guidelines,
Right.
but if we're not taking care of ourselves emotionally, it's a lot harder to make those healthy habits stick.
Right. It's not just about willpower.
Exactly. Willpower might help you in the moment,
Right.
but to really change your relationship with food, you have to dig a little deeper.
This is really eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing food in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's not just about fuel or temptation or whatever.
Mm.
It's about self-care and emotional well-being.
And when you start thinking about it that way, it becomes so much easier to make healthy choices. Choices that are good for you.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. We started out talking about the Australian dietary guidelines.
You did.
But look where we've ended up. All these fascinating ideas about nutrition, psychology, our relationship with food.
It's all connected.
It really is.
It's a journey, a delicious one, I hope.
And one that doesn't end here. To all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring all these ideas. Experiment with mindful eating. Learn more about how amazing food is. It's not just about feeding your body.
Right.
It's about nourishing your mind, too.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot in this second part. We got into mindful eating, practical strategies for dealing with cravings. We even touched on the importance of cooking at home. But before we move on,
Yeah.
I want to bring back something we mentioned earlier. Remember the emotional side of food?
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's time we really unpack that.
Okay, let's do it. This is going to be interesting. Okay, so let's unpack this whole emotional side of food thing.
All right, let's do it.
It's something we don't really talk about that much.
Yeah, it's kind of taboo.
But it feels like a pretty important part of healthy eating. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Food is so much more than just fuel. It's tied to our memories, our culture, how we celebrate, and yeah, even our emotions.
It's true. I mean, if I'm having a bad day, you can bet I'm headed straight for that cookie jar.
We've all been there.
It's not exactly the picture of a healthy relationship with food.
But you know, it's not about judging ourselves for that.
Okay, good.
There's got to be a healthier way to deal with all those emotional ties to food.
Right.
Right.
So how do we do that? How do we actually navigate those emotional connections to food in a healthier way?
I think it starts with recognizing that it's okay to have those connections. Like, it's part of what makes food so enjoyable.
Yeah, that's true. It's part of the experience.
So the key is to be aware of those connections.
Okay.
And make sure they're not leading you down a path of unhealthy behaviors.
So it's about finding that balance again.
Exactly.
Like enjoying those special treats and comfort foods sometimes, but not letting them control our eating habits.
That's it. It's about being mindful of those emotional triggers and having some strategies in place to handle them.
Earlier, you mentioned self-awareness
Right.
as a first step to breaking those emotional eating patterns.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that? How do we become more self-aware when it comes to food?
Just start paying attention. Notice when you're reaching for food and why. Like, what are you feeling? What's going on around you? Are you stressed? Bored? lonely, maybe you're even happy and celebrating.
Oh, I definitely do the happy hour snacking thing. Like, food has to be part of the celebration.
And it's totally fine if it's just once in a while. The problem is when it becomes a pattern that starts to affect your health or how you feel.
Right. So once we've figured out those triggers, those things that make us want to reach for food, what do we do next? Like, how do we actually break those automatic responses?
Okay, so think about other ways you can cope with those emotions. If stress is a big one for you, maybe try some yoga or meditation. If you're bored, pick up a new hobby or call a friend. Find things that make you feel good that don't involve food.
So it's about finding other ways to deal with those emotions, like
Yeah.
other outlets instead of just turning to food.
Exactly. It's about getting to the root of the problem instead of just trying to ignore it with food.
This is making me realize there's this whole mental and emotional part of healthy eating that I never really thought about before.
It's huge. We can have all the information in the world about nutrition and what we should be eating,
Right.
but if we're not taking care of ourselves emotionally, it's just so much harder to actually make those healthy habits stick.
So it's not just about willpower. It's not about just forcing ourselves to resist those cravings.
Willpower can help, but it's not enough on its own. If you want to really change your relationship with food, you have to go a bit deeper, figure out what's really going on.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. This is really interesting. It's like I'm seeing food in a totally different way now.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's not just about fuel or temptation. It's about taking care of myself.
That's it. And when you start seeing it like that, it becomes so much easier to make choices that are actually good for your whole self.
This has been amazing. I mean, we started with those Australian dietary guidelines, but look where we ended up. All these ideas about nutrition, psychology, our relationship with food,
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
all connected.
It really is. It's all part of the journey.
And hopefully it's a journey that continues for all of our listeners out there. So keep exploring these ideas.
Don't be afraid to experiment.
Try mindful eating. Learn more about food and how it can nourish you.
Because it's about more than just your body.
Exactly. It's about your mind, too.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. Thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep taking care of yourselves.